Hello there, BookTube. My name's Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. I've got no rhythm. Today going to do very quick Friday reads, but had a bumper. It won't be that quick because I had a bumper week of reading. I'll explain. First of all, congratulations to Susanna Clarke for winning the Women's Book Prize. Piranesi is right there next to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I happen to love Piranesi. I know it hasn't been everyone's cup of tea, and I haven't read a whole lot of the other shortlisted books. So anyway, I'm happy that book is acknowledged because I thought it was quite special. Okay, lots of books to get through because since I last recorded my last Friday reads, I had Shabbat, and then we had 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So did a lot, and I actually did a lot of reading on Shabbat. And there's one book that I read that I don't have because I've already lent it to a friend of mine who he came round. I literally just finished. It was last Saturday afternoon, and I was sitting on the couch and I just finished it. And I said I read this anyway. He ended up taking it with him when he left, and so I'll talk about it. I don't think I even know how to put a picture, but so I'll tell you about it. Okay, so what I was reading when last we met was Summer by Edith Wharton, and as this is this is the fifth Wharton, but I hadn't read any Wharton for about 15 years, and sort of remembered her over the summer when I was doing that big buying lots of books and sending them to my mum's. So I thought, well, I should read another Wharton, and I picked Summer without really knowing much about it. And there's a great introduction, I think I said this also in my last thing, by Professor Elizabeth Ammons, that places Summer in context of Wharton's other books and puts it sort of outside the norm of Wharton's books, and puts it alongside Edith Wharton, which was my least favourite. So I was a bit nervous going to this, but it was terrific. I mean, it's downbeat. Perhaps I'm used to sort of what we think of as classics as having happy endings, and this is tough. Our main character is a young girl called Charity Royal, who has been adopted by the big man in a very small town, who is the local lawyer, adopts her at a very young age, and she grows up in his house, very haughty. But I guess her redeeming characteristic is that she has a sense of her own limitations. Maybe that sounds harsh, but I think that's a fair description. That's her gift. Is she understands just enough of life to know that perhaps she is better off being a big fish in a small town pond. I thought this was quite lovely, and the whole thing is 200 pages and has some drama and some low points, and it's kind of, I mean, maybe it's a kind of cousin to Tess the D'Urbervilles without being anything like as tragic and as just hugely melodramatic as that. But there was something about this girl who perhaps aspired to more, but understood that she may not get it. Perfectly wonderful. There are other Whartons that I haven't read. Let me think of some of the names here. The Reef I haven't read, and then there's The Buccaneers was her unfinished book, and then I saw that she's written an autobiography, but it seems rather hard to find. Maybe I found an old copy of it. It's not in print of any of the sort of the classic, the Penguin Classic imprints or anything. But I don't think this will be the last Wharton. I think I will keep when I'm looking for books and I'm on eBay and I'm thinking, well, what else can I add to my basket for under a £5? I will read more Wharton because I think she's one of the greats. So after Edith Wharton's Summer, and I read Edith Wharton's Summer like 2 or 3 books after I read Ali Smith's Summer, so there's some kind of synchronicity going on. After that, I, as I often do, I picked up a graphic novel, and this is book 3, I believe, in of the Hellboy collected editions. Hellboy was not a character that I was ever into, like when they were first being published, and I sort of, Hellboy started, sort of arrived just as I got to the end of my regular comic buying life, and he first appeared in a book called Next Men by John Byrne, and I had collected Next Men and sort of stopped before that first appearance of Hellboy, which is worth a lot. I think I stopped reading at issue 20 and he shows up in issue 21, and that's now worth whatever. Anyway, but I was been aware of Hellboy over the years, and in the last couple of years, only because I started seeing them, these collected editions going cheap, I started buying them up and reading them. Mike, I never say his name, I mean it's Mignola, and so I'm guessing as an American he probably goes by Mignola, but the snob in me wants to pronounce it as sort of Mignola. I don't know what he prefers, and I really should find out. And these were some good stories. What's great about the work he's doing here is he's drawing on real folklore and fairy stories and ghost stories that have been around for years. So stories about fairies kidnapping babies, and stories about how fairies are allergic to iron, and so that was the way, when the changeling baby has been replaced by a little sprite, and Hellboy touches the baby's head with a horseshoe to see if the child recall, if it's a real human baby, it won't do anything, and if it's some kind of changeling, then it will recoil in horror at the approach of the iron. Lots of lovely little details. I mean, that's a very simple one, but some of the stories of deals done, bargains made with fairies and ghosts rising, just clearly this is a deep love of him. Clearly he's very connected to these stories, and Hellboy is a fantastic conduit between our world and the world of the Fae and the world of the world beyond. There's also a whole lot in lots of these stories. The world beyond, the dead rise and the dead talk, and Hellboy is a conduit. He's the one who can hear them talking and report back to the living, and that's clearly an obsession with the writer here. That idea that death is not the end, that people communicate beyond the grave, and the dead have something to say, and sometimes we should be listening. But that it's the story. Do the stories work? And this is a bunch of stories that collect. This is, I think, comprising sort of 6 or 8 comics and maybe 2 or 3 stories running across them, and they're all pretty good. I think this is I've read. This is number 3. I've read the first 2, and I had 4 and 5, so I read those. So after this, I'm going to jump. I might skim through 4 and 5 again, but then I carry on. I've got 6, 7, 8, 9, which I bought in my big purchase of the summer. This is just good stories. Some Hellboy origin stuff. Who is he? Where does he come from? Why does he have a fist made of stone? And what are those things on his head, which I always thought were goggles, which of course is filed down horns. Hellboy, good stuff. This is volume 3, The Chained Coffin and Others. Now, after that, I read this book. This is super interesting. Or at least interesting, perhaps right up until the moment I started reading it. This is The Dolly Dolly Spy by Adam Dement. Okay, so how do I come to this? This is a pan paperback. This is originally published in 1967. As an original novel. Adam Dement wrote 4 books from about 67, 68 to 72. Bestsellers, widely published. His face was on the side of buses. These books were advertised and going down London. This is late the swinging 60s. This is post-Bond. So Fleming is writing these books from the early 50s, and sort of he's dead by 65, and the movies are just taking off. Goldfinger is Dr. No is 62, 63, From Russia with Love, 63, 64, Goldfinger is 65, that's the height of Bond mania, but Fleming is dead, there's still lots of movies to come afterwards, and Adam Dement steps out into this world and writes a series of 4 spy novels featuring a character called Philip McAlpine, and this is the first one. Now, how do I come across these books? I had never heard of Adam Dement. I listened to a podcast called Backlisted. Backlisted? Yes. And the Backlisted is produced by a publishing house called Unbound. Unbound is a crowdfunding publishing house. It's very successful, and I've got one or 2 of their books. I've got Brian Bilston's first book of poetry was published by Unbound. What they do is if you have a manuscript you want to be published, you could write to Unbound, and if they decide to take on your manuscript, they put your book up and try and crowdfund the cost of book production. And so they encourage you, to go out and raise money from friends and family and go on social media, and when you cross a certain threshold, they publish your book and whatever. I don't even understand the terms of the deal, but that's how Unbound works. They take a stake in what you do and help you, encourage you to raise the money necessary to cover the costs of production / marketing, or whatever that first set of fixed costs are in publishing a book. And not everybody crosses that threshold, and but if you do, you've got your book out, and then I think they're fairly they don't tie you into any contract. So I think people who've had their first book published by Unbound often then get picked up by sort of mainstream, more traditional publishers. Anyway, that's Unbound. So there is a fantastic podcast, I believe, called Backlisted, where one of the publishers of Unbound, another guy called John Mitchinson, who was also one of the people behind QI, if you know that British show, and he was an old friend of Douglas Adams back in the day, I believe, and another guy called Andy Miller, and they talk about backlisted books, old books. They focus very much on British books, and something like the 30s and 40s sometimes, and they've surfaced a whole bunch of stuff that I would never have come across, and then occasionally they'll talk about something that I happen to have come across, and it's always good banter, always interesting. These people love books, they read widely and deeply and talk enjoyably. That's a great podcast. If I remember, I'll put a list. Anyway, they put out a tweet saying, this is all the way around to getting back to Adam Dement. They put out a tweet saying, the next campaign, the next crowdfunding campaign, is to republish all 4 of Adam Dement's Philip McAlpine novels in one volume. And this is the campaign. There is mine. Okay. So I decided at that point, well, that's kind of interesting. I'll look into the thing. And I start looking into who Adam Dement is. And he wrote these 4 books, I say, between 67 and 73, where he was a young man in his early 20s and a sensation in London, and then disappeared, fell off the map, and went into hiding and was never heard of again. At one point, people thought he was in Switzerland working in an office. Someone said this, he'd gone bankrupt doing that, or he was laying carpets in Cornwall. I don't know what. He's still alive. And it's unclear what. He just didn't want to be famous anymore. Never published another thing. These 4 spy books of the swinging 60s, and that was it. So this Unbound. So I hear about this campaign to publish all 4. I think, well, why don't I just go and see if I can find them? And I went online, went on eBay, and found someone selling the first 2. So I have this one, the Dolly Dolly Spy, and I have the second one, which I can't remember what it's called, but it's in the spare room. So now it's time to eventually read them. Oh, by the way, the campaign didn't reach its threshold. The books aren't being republished, so that's it. You can't find them. They're not being republished. The only way you can find them is sort of battered old paperbacks that people are selling. The first 2 you can find for a reasonable price. I think the 4th one is very hard to find for a reasonable price. I think there's a one going on Amazon for like £70 for a paperback in this kind of battered condition. Anyway, I bought the first 2. I read the first one. This is filthily racist, and sort of quite in your face, with some very retrograde attitudes towards other people. A lot of drugs, a lot of casual sex. I mean, that's what he's coming. It's supposed to be a young, hip, druggy spy. Actually, the plot is fairly straightforward. Yes, there is some sex and the occasional smoking of a hashish cigarette, but it's a fairly straightforward spy caper where he is press ganged to work for the British intelligence services against his will, forced because they have found some of his hashish in his apartment, and he'll have to go to prison if he doesn't, and ends up caught between the British and the American intelligence services, who are both fighting over the same asset, who's a former Nazi, and he's supposed to pretend to be working for one and really working for the other, and then he has this rather brutal former Nazi in his care, and what's he going to do? Is he going to kill the Nazi? Is he going to give the Nazi to the British? Is he going to give the Nazi to the Americans? Who is he betraying? Blah blah. As I say, the plot is fairly straightforward, but neatly done. It's not that the book is racist, and it's a horrible defence, but you could read this and, okay, they're going to use that word, and they're going to use that word, and they're going to describe people like that, and it's all supposed to be sort of hip and cool, and that's just the way things are, man. But it's pretty unpleasant. but it zipped along, and it's not trying to offend. It just is. I've read clear instances of anti-Semitism in Trollope's work, where clearly Trollope is making very clear that Trollope, the author, and these characters who are his heroes, have a deep antipathy towards Jews. That's unpleasant. In this case, there's no... the racist language is not backed up by, I think white people are superior. It's just shitty racist language. Anyway, that's the Dolly Dolly Spy. I've got the next one. I'll read it. I'm not sure I'm going to go out of my way to chase down the last two. It's an artifact of its time. It was kind of zippy, fun and sexy and druggy, but actually the plot was quite straightforward and quite mainstream. Dolly Dolly Spy, pretty sure this won't come up on anyone's radar by accident, but it came up on mine, and now I've read it. Next up is the book I don't have. Yeah, so after that, I read a book which I have no idea how I came to, and I'll tell you the name of the book and I'll repeat it several times. I can't hold it up and show it to you the whole time. The book was called Three Rings by Daniel Mendelsohn, Mendelsohn. Now, I have never come across Daniel Mendelsohn before, and I probably should have done. And I'll tell you about two of his other books, his earlier books, which he discusses very much. I'm not just telling you other books he's published. He talks about them in this book, Three Rings. He's I think he's been a book reviewer for the New York Review of Books, maybe a senior editor there. He's a journalist and an essayist and a columnist, and he's also I think a classical scholar. I think that's his initial background is the Greek classics, and I think he's been a teacher for many years in one of the colleges in New York. I'm forgetting, I don't have the blurb in front of me. So yeah, his name should, and I guess he's about 10 years older than me. I should have come across it. Maybe I've seen his name and haven't realised him, but he's somebody who clearly I'm interested in. Some of his collected columns right in my sweet spot between talking about popular culture but also classic literature, and so he'll talk about The Sopranos, but then he'll talk about the Iliad. So right in my sweet spot of all things, and he clearly is a polymath and a brilliant and erudite man. I don't know why I bought this book, Three Rings. It's very slim. I've got a slim hardback volume, I think published by University of Virginia Press. I think this is originally based on a series of lectures he gave, and the whole thing is about 110 pages. So very easy, very readable, very accessible. I don't know why I bought it. Maybe it was up for some prize, maybe it just piqued my interest and I saw the thing, and then I went online, looked for it and found it for a new hardback, which would have been sort of £11-12.99, and maybe I bought it for £6, £7, £8, £9, and somehow it ended up in my to-be-read pile, and I can't really explain why. And then I picked it up and started reading it, and it whatever the reason it got there, clearly is right there. In the opening of the book, he talks about an earlier book he'd written. It's a book he published 15 years ago called The Lost, which is a book about the Holocaust, tracing relatives of his who were lost from a village in Poland, and trying to work out what happened to them, where they died, what their life was like. And one of these reconstruction Holocaust narratives where you go back and rebuild the lives, and instead of talking about the loss and the death and the camps, you talk about what these lives were, and you it's about humans being lost and not just unfathomable numbers in mass graves. It's about individuals. So a book that clearly would speak to me, and I'm actually interested. It sounds a bit like Theo Richmond's Conan, which is a callback to the Martin Amis book, where he mentions Theo Richmond as a guest in his father's house, and then mentions the book Conan, which I read more than 20 years ago. It was a fantastic book about the Holocaust history without being about the macro, just focusing on the micro. Anyway, so that's The Lost by Daniel Mendelsohn, and at the start of Three Rings by Daniel Mendelsohn, he talks about the PTSD or the some kind of post-traumatic stress, that funk that he fell into after doing the research for this book, and he travelled widely and spoke to lots and lots of people in building the story and trying to trace what had happened to his, I think it's an uncle or some cousins or relatives of his. And at the beginning of the book, he talks about the only time he broke down was in the Museum of the Diaspora, which is in Tel Aviv, which we've visited many times. It's less than a 30-minute drive from here, where they have one of the famous rooms in the Museum of the Diaspora, Beta Futsot in Tel Aviv, is they have a huge hall with glass cases, and in each one is a replica of famous of synagogues from around the world, and they're like tiny models that they've recreated these synagogues, many of which don't exist anymore. So there's a synagogue from Koshin in India, there's some grand synagogue from Morocco, and then there's a synagogue somewhere in Eastern Europe, and then there's a synagogue in South America or in Rhode Island or whatever it may be, and he talks in the opening of the story. He talks about seeing these models, knowing that there is no model of the great synagogue in this town in Poland that he's been trying to trace and track down what happened to the people who lived there. The model doesn't exist because no one was ever left alive who remembered what the synagogue looked like. And he has a complete breakdown and tears there. Anyway, that was the opening of this book that I had no idea was going to be about Jews and about their roots and about the Holocaust and memory and exile. And from there we get 3 stories of 3 exiles, the last of which is W.G. Sebald, I don't know how you pronounce his name. I read one of his books, Austerlitz, but I haven't read Rings of Saturn, which is supposed to be, and I didn't get on so well with Austerlitz, but I kind of saw that. Anyway, that's the third of the 3 exiles, who's a non-Jew, who's a German who, unable to face the horrors of his what had happened in Germany, exiled himself to England and lived his life. And running through each of these 3 tales of men having left their homes and living in exile, we have Homer's Odyssey, which I'm ashamed to say that I don't know as well as I should, but Mendelsohn weaves this thread of Ulysses' journey and staying away and coming back, and Telemachus's story as well is weaved into the story of these people and why they left where they left and where they set up home again. And one of them is a Jewish exile from 1930s Germany who joins the university in what was Constantinople at the time, where there are no books, and he's having to write his thesis, but just an incredibly erudite, I'm talking for hours about this, incredibly erudite and wonderful story, and just makes me want to go back and read, first of all, Mendelsohn's book, The Lost, which I think was a prize-winning book in 2005. Obviously, I missed it at the time. Many of you may have read it, and just sort of staring at me incredulously that I'd never heard of Daniel Mendelsohn or didn't know this book. And then there's another book of his, which he talks about also, which was based on his father, who he had never really connected with. His father, I think, was a very practical man, and Mendelsohn is an academic, and they had never sort of found common ground intellectually. And I think in his 70s, his father decides to turn up and listen to one of his lectures about the Odyssey, because he's a Greek classical scholar. And after sitting in on his lecture, they then go on a journey, a real-life journey, the two of them, where they trace Ulysses' steps. They go to the Greek islands, they go to different places, where the labyrinth was supposed to be, and where that story was supposed to happen, and where he meets the Cyclops, and they go round the islands, and he's written a book about his Odyssey with his father, and I believe tragically his father died within a year after that, so this was a very important journey for him. So 2 books at least of Daniel Mendelsohn's, which I'm absolutely dying to read, plus then those collected works of criticism which cross all boundaries and pop culture and classical culture. And anyway, that was 3 Rings by Daniel Mendelsohn. I don't have it to hold it up here because I've already lent it to my friend Stephen, but highly, highly recommended, and I will be buying more Daniel Mendelsohn. Okay, good. So that was book 4. So we're still last Shabbat at this point. After that, I read another graphic story. This time it was the case of the simple soul, and this is one of these weird-shaped former webcomic. That's why it's laid out like this, because you can see that's the format of the art. This is the third in the series, Bad Machinery, by John Allison. First two were super cute. This was probably less successful because it was more of a story running through the whole thing rather than sort of jokes hitting at the end of each panel, but that's just me. If I can, I think there are 9 of these altogether published, and I've now bought 3 of them, which should have sold for £15 each, and I'm picking them up for £5, £6, £7. If I can get more of these, they look fabulous, right? I've got 3 of them sitting on the shelf, and they stand right out the shelf because they're too deep for the shelf, and they just look great together. And this is me sort of buying these, even though this wasn't great. This one, I like the first 2. I'll pick up more of them at the right price because they look great and they're fun to read and they're diverting. This is half an afternoon's worth of graphic novel. The Case of the Simple Soul. It has trolls living under bridges. It has firemen. It has arson. It has mysteries. It has children. Perfectly sweet. So that was the 5th book. Right, 1, 2, 3, Daniel Mendelsohn. This is the 5th book that I read on Shabbat. So I had a very successful 5th book I finished last Saturday. Then I decided, after reading all those, the silly spy novels and very short academic works and some comic books, I wanted something meaty. I was going into Rosh Hashanah. I knew I was going to be sitting in synagogue all morning, and I thought I'd better take something meaty. I'm sitting there like 2.5 hours of praying and hearing Torah readings, and so in between, in the dull bits in between the blowing of the shofar, I tend to have a novel with me. So I finally got round to reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Outstanding. So I haven't read any Maggie O'Farrell before, and she's sort of being caught up in the net of one of the rules that I have, which is, I don't really like reading books by anyone I actually know. I don't know Maggie O'Farrell. I was in school with her husband. He was a couple of years below me. He would have been, I think, same year as Sacha Baron Cohen or Matt Lucas. But I definitely remember William because his brother was in my year, and I was in a school play. I was in a government inspector with Maggie O'Farrell's brother-in-law, and we had some classes together. And then in the last few years, 6 or 7 years, he made contact with me, and we met up. He was visiting here. His brother-in-law, who also went to our school, lives here. So his wife's brother lives here. So they were visiting. I met up with Maggie O'Farrell's husband's brother. This is a long story. Anyway, no reason for me not to read Maggie O'Farrell at all. I haven't read her husband because I went to school with him. So and he's written a few books. Famously, the first one called New Boy, which was very much about our school. So I didn't read that. Anyway, this is Hamnet, and this is a daring conceit, because when you call your book Hamnet, the only thing anyone knows about Hamnet is that he dies aged 11. That's all we know. So just calling your book this name, we know that there is a boy, age 11, who when they start the story, is either going to be dead or is about to be dead, because Hamnet died aged 11. This is the story that we have. Hamnet is, of course, the son of the bard of Avon, and his wife, who we tend to think of as Anne Hathaway, and in this book Anne is known as, it's spelled Agnes, which I would pronounce Agnes, and it's explained that it's probably closer to Annis, so it's kind of closer to Anne, Annis, Agnes. It's like a sort of Frenchified version. So even though whenever I read it as Agnes, that time, like Agnes Moorehead, it's explained that it's would have been kind of run on, and that's why Anne and Agnes were kind of interchangeable, as Hamnet and the version of this name that we know far better are interchangeable. Hamnet and Hamlet are the same things. So while the bard does appear, he is never named. He's only known as the Latin tutor or the father, or by some other euphemistic title. We never use his name of the most famous poet, playwright in human history, certainly in the English language human history. And he's a character in it. We get his inner thoughts, and he shows up as as Hamnet's father and as Agnes's husband, and we have the tragic story of Hamnet, his twin sister Judith, who gets ill, and Hamnet making a conscious decision to die in her place. And there's some kind, there's a mystical element running through this. Hamnet's mother, Agnes, has some truck with mysticism. She's able to perceive things beyond human ken. It's said that she touches people, grabs them between the thumb and forefinger, and clings on, and is able to know what they're thinking or see perhaps into their future. And she has a vision of her own future as well that she just always knows. And she knows when she's pregnant, she knows when she's giving birth, she knows what she's having. She can feel there's some. She's a creature of nature. She keeps in the first part of the story, at least, she keeps a hummingbird. I believe a kestrel, and that's when the bard, or the as he's then called, the Latin tutor, first meets her. And there's a scene when they first couple with the hooded kestrel in the barn. It's sexy and weird and moving, and so we have the backwards in time when the Latin tutor and Agnes get together, and then we move forward in time when there are three kids: their oldest child Susanna, and their twins Judith and Hamnet, and we watch Hamlet's illness and death, and his burial and his funeral, and what comes after. For all this time, the tutor is in London with his theatrical troupe, and he's in London because Agnes has arranged it that he goes to London. She sees his melancholy, she sees his lack of fulfillment, and she cleverly plants seeds in his father's mind and his mother's mind, that his father would send him away, and I don't need you, help me out here, you need to go and start the business in London. So he ends up in London, drops out of the business, and starts writing and working with theatrical people. And it's tremendously moving. As I say, this sort of really tough conceit to write this story about Hamnet. What the actual goal of this book, as a book has any goal, what this book is really about is could not be simpler. It's a book about parental angst. It's a book about loss. It's a book about grief, and specifically the loss of a child, which is that is not in my experience, but I imagine it is significantly different to any other kind of loss. But what is in my experience is that angst, that thought of when your child is ill, or even when the child is a baby and not ill, and just when you lean down and just check, are they breathing? And maybe you never did this, but I've done this, and I've spoken about this with my wife. I remember when they were little, and my baby is now 23, but I remember them being babies in the crib, and you walk in and you can't hear the breathing, and you know they're all right, but you listen and you get closer, and then you prod them to make them make a noise, because you need that that's that fear, that catching of breath, that uncertainty is absolutely vivid to me. Over 20 years since I had a baby, living in my home. My children, thank goodness, are adults and independent, and but still I fear for them. My middle son has just flown to Costa Rica and took a bus over the border to Nicaragua. So he had Rosh Hashanah, I believe, with Chabad in Nicaragua, and is enjoying himself there. I think you spoke to him yesterday, and he was heading up a volcano somewhere. And there is still, in the pit of my stomach, this is a 25-year-old independent young man who that knot in my stomach, the fear and the concern for our children, it is inexplicable, and it is something that Maggie O'Farrell has captured here. I believe, I haven't read her previous book. She has a book called I Am, which talks about, I think, 17 brushes with death, many of which involve her daughter, who had been ill, and visiting the emergency room late at night. And I don't want to presume that an author's real life has informed a novel. But it seems to me that this book, which is so laser focused on that universal feeling that every parent has, fear and concern, and in the case of Hamnet, the worst possible outcome. That thing may stem from things that Maggie O'Farrell has gone through with her own child, but from that she has created both a wholly successful work of historical fiction, a deeply universal story about parental fear, terror, and angst, and and something beautiful about art. The end of the story, within 4 years of Hamnet dying, Hamlet is produced on the stage in London, the Globe Theatre, for the first time, and that is without spoiling that, the book leads towards that, and how you get from losing a son to producing this work, and which is a story of a son talking to his father, who is a ghost, and questioning his own mortality and suicidal ideation, and all sorts of other things. It just worked on every level for me, if you like. I'm really having a good run of modern fiction these days, and this was a good one. Okay, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, whose husband was a few years below me in school. So another comic book after that, because I bought so many comic books, and I feel like I have to, and it's good after you read a big, even though I read it in one day because of Rosh Hashanah, you feel like after working my way through 400 pages of that I want to lighten up. And I picked up The Outsiders, Volume 1. This is The Outsiders, the third volume of The Outsiders. This was published in 2003. This is the first 7 issues collected. Just absolute nonsense, inessential rubbish. I guess this might be someone that you know. This is, at this point, he's known as Nightwing. He was formerly Dick Grayson, if you know anything about comics. The rest of them are just nobodies. So this is a character called Arsenal, whose real name is Roy Harper. He used to be known as Speedy, so he's one of the original Teen Titans. He was Green Arrow's sidekick, and at one point a heroin addict back in the 60s. Anyway, and the rest of them are sort of nobodies. Jade is Alan Scott, the first Golden Age Green Lantern's daughter. You got Metamorpho, or is it? And then a new character called Grace Choi, who has some secret history. You've got she's an android who can hack any computer, of course, and this is Thunder, who is Black Lightning's daughter, who can decrease her density. So I don't know what you do with that. And so she increases her density, and then she can stamp her foot on the floor, and it knocks everyone over, including her teammates, except they never seem to. Anyway, just rubbish. This is written by a chap called Judd Winnick, who I'm not that familiar with, and he has an introduction to this volume where he talks about, we all met at Comic-Con in 2002, and the editor said to me, why don't you try this? And I thought, no, I really want to do this and make it something different and make it gritty and make it, not terribly successful. I think this ran for like 50 issues, so this is issues 1 through 7. I've got the next volume coming up in a second, and that was it. I bought these first 2 volumes. I think I paid like £2 or £3 each for them. I don't know why. I never needed to read this story. Now that I've read it, it's kind of rubbish. Fun, it wasn't terrible, but it's just sort of punchy, shooty, hitty, a bit sexy, but not in a way that Roy Harper is not a very sexy man, but women seem to throw themselves at him. Anyway, Outsiders, Volume 1, Looking for Trouble, Judd Winnick. Then, second day, Rosh Hashanah, I took another novel with me. So that's all. I finished Hamnet on the first day, read The Outsiders, Volume 1, and took with me on the second day this. This is Red Pill by Harry Kunzru. I bought this because I had such an incredibly positive experience with his previous novel, which was White Tears. If you haven't read White Tears by Harry Kunzru, it was an absolute banger, a book that totally for me, took me in one direction, turned out being something completely different, in a way that absolutely wrong-footed the reader, but also made the reader complicit in everything that you thought was this, and you'd gone down that path, oh yeah, that's right, and then you realise, no, that's completely wrong, and by thinking that, you are part of the problem. It's a terrific book. And you don't feel cheated. You just feel seen and confronted. in the best way. White Tears was outstanding, really, really outstanding work, and I recommend it to everyone. And so I thought I picked up Red Pill, and this was a new hardback last year, and I would have got it a bit cheaper. It sold $14.99 new. I think I paid less, like £8.99, £9. And I bought it. I think it's now out in paperback. That was the whole thing. I waited so long to pick up these books from my mum that and then another 2 or 3 months till I get around to reading it, and it's already out in paperback. Anyway, this is good stuff. I don't think it's quite as successful as White Tears, but I think it's also a more straightforward book. Here we have a writer who goes on a writer's retreat. He's having some troubles. He's having trouble focusing. He writes sort of fancy intellectual essays about the world and about how we're supposed to view the world, and he's kind of in a rut. He had a successful book which he then had to go around talking about for a number of months, and now his editor has come back and says he wants another book, and he's run out of things to say. In that time he has got married and had a child, and he's just terribly worried about whether he will be able to protect his wife and his child from all the terrible, shitty things that are going on in the world. And he's just very wrapped up in this neurotic sense of his inadequacy in the face of the world turning to absolute shit. In the middle of this, he is invited to a writer's retreat, and the writer's retreat is in, I'm going to butcher this name, is it Wannsee? Wannnsee in Germany, where they had the famous conference in 1942 where Heydrich, what's his face, and Eichmann laid out the final solution for the Jews. So, not a fun place, and it's grim and it's on the water, but he's in some big converted old house near the house where the conference took place, and it turns out to be kind of fascistic. And they're very, he goes there and he thinks he's going to be able to lock himself up in his room, but actually, in order to get his stipend for this writer's retreat, he needs to work in the common room in a cubicle where everyone else is working, and sort of it's all about creating this sort of communal energy. And when he doesn't spend enough time in that computer, he's told he hasn't logged enough hours, and he may have to return his. Anyway, it's an odd experience, and he gets more and more upset about this and less able to work, and starts becoming more and more paranoid about them watching him and judging him and talking about his work. In the middle of all this, he becomes involved with, initially a TV show. He starts watching when he's not doing his work the way he's supposed to be. He locks himself in his room, and on his laptop he streams episodes of a TV show, which I guess is clearly based on the show The Shield. If you've ever seen that, it's about a corrupt cop who's violent and aggressive but lives by some kind of code, but and it turns out that in the end the criminals are even more violent and aggressive than he is, but so it's always the comparative morals of the corruption, the corrupt police, and the even more corrupt and impossible to be otherwise criminals. Anyway, so he becomes obsessed with the show, and then somehow ends up interacting with the creator, bumps into him at a party in Berlin, the American TV executive who has created the show and pumped it full of messages about how actually the whole world is corrupt and nothing really matters, and it's all about violence, and so he goes through this process of having of paranoia, of this sort of fascistic, everyone's watching him and reporting on him, writers' conference, and somehow gets involved with genuine fascists. I should stop talking about plot. I don't know why I've been so plot heavy in these descriptions, because it's not, it's no use to you. It's a terrific book. Really enjoyed this. There's a lot going on. Most of it is this writer narrator having a complete breakdown, and the sense that the world is in a dark place, and it's not just paranoia, and it's not just neurosis that is telling him that, but it is an actual reflection of the world. And again, without wishing to spoil it, the whole book is barreling towards the night of November 8th, 2016, which was for many proof that the world was actually turning to shit. It's good stuff. Red Pill, Harry Kunzru, recommended. Another great novel, 2 in 1 week. That was great. So then after that, because I didn't want to wait, having read the first volume, I had the second volume. I knew if I didn't read it straight away, I probably never would, and then volume 2 was going to be sitting on my to-be ripper. So I just went and got, that was 1 through 7 of this volume of The Outsiders, and this is like 8 through 15 or whatever it was. And more of the same, they go up against, this is a demon character called Sabak. This is Simon of the Furious Five, Simon spelled P-S-I-M-O-N, and then same cast of characters we had before. With some special guest stars, the Huntress and Black Lightning shows up, and Captain Marvel Jr. and just more sort of punchy rubbish. Volume 2 of The Outsiders, Sum of All Evil, and I've got 2 volumes done. I'm not buying any more of those. Maybe I might lend them to my brother, but really rubbishy. So that's that, and then I started, and I'll finish this weekend. Daniel Silver's The Confessor. This is about Gabriel Allon, who is an Israeli spy, former assassin who gets called in to do all sorts of jobs for the Mossad. And this one has a lot, so far I'm 50 pages in, a lot of Pope action. So we're in the Vatican a lot of papal intrigue, which is kind of interesting. It's called The Confessor. So anyway, I've read 2 of these, the third one I've read, and the only reason I'm reading them, the only reason I've got the next 3 after this, the only reason I bought them is because James Ellroy says they're super fun, so I didn't really think the first 2 were much cob. This is the third one, 50 pages in, actually enjoyed this a bit more, but I'll do this weekend, and then next week, so my mum is arriving on Monday, we just heard today, we had to go through hoops and get her approval in order to come back, so she was here for a month in June, and she went back to London, and now she's coming back in a couple of days, and she'll stay for another month, and that's super exciting. She's not bringing me any books. I think one Agatha Christie I had sent, but there's no more. She's not bringing me any books. But then we've got Yom Kippur, so I'll do that's Wednesday night, Thursday, and then the following week is Sukkot. So next Thursday night, which is when I usually film these, will be straight after Yom Kippur, so there may be a lot of people now, so I don't know if I'll get to something. Maybe I'll do I'm so behind on tags, and all I'm doing at the moment is once a week Friday reads, and I should get back in doing some other videos. There's some great discussion videos this week with that Roz Scally Dandling about the books started, and then Steve Donoghue responded, and Mark Nash responded, and I love all those, and they're all great conversations about what is a novel and about that bizarro sentencing that was handed out in the UK. Anyway, you can see all this. I'm done. This is could be one of my longest, and I don't believe anyone is still watching. Here's the thing: if you are still watching at this point and you've got to the end of the video, if you decide to leave a comment, just somewhere in your comment include the word gravel, and then we'll know. Take care. God bless. Bye.